In the 3rd century of the Common Era, a Persian prophet sat down and attempted something that no one had tried before. He tried to count the great kingdoms of the world, not the minor kingdoms, not the client states, the vassal territories, the regional powers that rose and fell in a generation. The great kingdoms, the ones that shaped the course of human history, the ones that every educated person in the ancient world would recognize without explanation. He named 4: the Kingdom of Babylon and Persia, the Kingdom of Rome, the Kingdom of the Chinese, and the 4th, the Kingdom of the Aksumites, and then Aksum, a name that most people reading this have never encountered in a history class. A civilization that appears in almost no standard curriculum. A kingdom that the ancient world ranked alongside Rome, and that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. Why? That is one of the questions this story will try to answer. But first, the story itself. Because what the Aksumites built in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea was not a minor achievement misremembered as a great one. It was genuinely extraordinary. A kingdom that dominated the Red Sea trade for 6 centuries, that minted gold coins at a time when gold coinage was the exclusive marker of the world's most powerful states, that produced monumental architecture of a scale and sophistication that still astonishes modern engineers. That became one of the first kingdoms on earth to adopt Christianity as a state religion, decades before the Roman Empire did the same. That sent its armies across the Red Sea to control Arabia. That corresponded with emperors, with Persian kings, with Indian merchants, with Byzantine patriarchs. That built a civilization so durable that its language is still spoken in religious ceremony today, its church still standing, its obelisks still reaching toward the sky above the city that gave the kingdom its name. And that was then somehow lost. Not destroyed, not burned, not conquered and erased the way so many civilizations were eliminated, simply forgotten. By whom and why, and what that forgetting costs us. That is part of this story too. This is the Kingdom of Aksum, and it is time to remember. There is a landscape in northeastern Africa that looks to a first-time visitor like it belongs to a different planet. The Ethiopian highlands rise from the surrounding lowlands in a series of dramatic escarpments. Walls of rock that ascend thousands of meters in what seems, from a distance, like a single step. The plateau at the top is enormous, a vast, rolling landscape of green valleys and brown peaks cut by deep river gorges, swept by winds that carry the smell of rain and red earth. The altitude is such that the air has a clarity unusual in Africa. The sky seems to go on forever, the horizon impossibly sharp, the stars at night dense and close and overwhelming in their number. This is the Tigray region of modern Ethiopia. And this highland fortress, for that is what it is geographically, a fortress raised on stone walls that nature itself constructed, was the heartland of the Aksumite kingdom. The land gave the Aksumites everything they needed and more. The highlands received reliable rainfall. Unlike the lowland deserts to the east and the north, the plateau caught the monsoon rains that swept up from the Indian Ocean, watering the valleys and filling the streams that ran down toward the lowlands. The soil was volcanic and rich, capable of sustaining intensive agriculture. The climate was temperate. Cool nights, warm days, none of the crushing heat of the surrounding lowlands. And the plateau, was surrounded on all sides by landscapes of enormous economic value. To the northeast, through the escarpment, the terrain fell sharply toward the Red Sea coast, toward the port of Adulis, which would become one of the most important commercial harbors in the ancient world. The Red Sea was not merely a body of water, it was the highway connecting the Mediterranean world to the Indian Ocean, the route along which silk moved from China, spices from India, cotton from South Asia, and in the other direction, Roman gold, Egyptian grain, Mediterranean wine, and olive oil. Whoever controlled the African side of the Red Sea controlled a piece of every transaction that passed along it. The Aksumites controlled it for centuries. To the west of the highlands, the land descended toward the great river systems of the African interior, toward the sources of gold, ivory, and other commodities that the Mediterranean world craved but could not produce. The highland kingdom sat between two economic worlds, the maritime trade of the Red Sea and the overland trade of Africa. It was, in the most precise geographic sense, a kingdom positioned at a crossroads. The Aksumites did not stumble into this position accidentally. The evidence suggests that the people who built the kingdom understood exactly where they were, exactly what that position was worth, and exactly what was required to exploit it. They built roads down the escarpment to the coast. They built cisterns and water systems in the highland city to support a population larger than the local agriculture alone could sustain. They developed the administrative apparatus, the bureaucracy, the written records, the system of taxation and tribute to manage a commercial empire spread across terrain of extraordinary variety and difficulty. They were not simply a highland people who happened to be near the sea. They were an empire that used the sea as deliberately and as intelligently as any naval power in the ancient world. The origins of this kingdom reach back further than the 1st century CE, when Aksum first appears clearly in the written record. Archaeological evidence suggests that the region was home to complex hierarchical societies for many centuries before that. Societies that built in stone, that organized agricultural labor, that engaged in long-distance trade. The kingdom that emerged into historical visibility in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE was not a sudden creation. It was the culmination of a long process of social and political consolidation, of different peoples and communities gradually organized under a single royal authority, speaking of a common language, sharing a common material culture, and united by the common project of extracting maximum benefit from their extraordinary geographic position. The language they spoke and wrote was Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language related to Arabic and Hebrew. Ge'ez was the administrative, literary, and eventually liturgical language of the Aksumite kingdom. The Aksumites developed their own distinctive script to write it, an alpha syllabary, where each character represented a consonant modified by the vowel that followed it, producing an elegant and efficient system of writing that could capture the sounds of the language with precision. That script, slightly modified, is still in use today. The Ethiopic script used to write Amharic, Tigrinya, and several other Ethiopian languages is a direct descendant of the Aksumite writing system. Walk through Addis Ababa today and the signs above the shops, the headlines on the newspapers, the text messages on people's phones. All of it is written in characters that the Aksumite scribes of 2,000 years ago would find familiar. The kingdom is gone. The script endures. Picture a harbor on the western shore of the Red Sea. The mountains rise steeply behind it, the escarpment of the Ethiopian highlands, their peaks lost in cloud, their faces deeply eroded by the seasonal rains. The coastal plain between the mountains and the sea is narrow, hot, and dry, a complete contrast to the cool green plateau above. The sea itself glitters in the sun, its waters moving in the patterns created by the northerly winds that dominate for much of the year. Into this harbour, in the first centuries of the Common Era, came ships from across the known world. From the north, Roman and Egyptian vessels, broad-beamed merchant ships carrying wine, olive oil, fine glassware, copper ingots, and above all, gold. The Roman Empire had an insatiable appetite for the luxury goods of the East and South, and it paid for them in the hardest currency available. Roman gold coins, solidi ore, circulated throughout the Indian Ocean trading world as the preferred medium of large-scale commercial transactions. From the east, ships from Arabia, from India, from the Persian Gulf, carrying pepper, cinnamon, cotton textiles, steel from India's famous forges, pearls from the Gulf, and the spices that the Mediterranean world could not produce for itself. And from the land side, down the steep paths from the highland plateau, through the escarpment passes, came the goods that the Aksumthe kingdom had to sell to this hungry world. Ivory. The highlands and savannas of northeastern Africa supported enormous elephant populations, and the ivory trade was one of the most lucrative in the ancient world. Roman aristocrats ate their meals from ivory tables. Indian rulers decorated their palaces with ivory carvings. The demand seemed inexhaustible, and the Aksumthe, who controlled the hunting grounds and the trade routes from the interior, were perfectly positioned to supply it. Gold. The rivers and mines of the African interior produced gold of high purity, and Aksum controlled the routes along which that gold moved northward toward the Red Sea. The kingdom processed some of it into finished goods and exported some as raw metal, but either way, gold was central to Aksumite wealth, frankincense and myrrh. The Ethiopian highlands and the adjacent lowlands produced these aromatic resins in quantities sufficient to supply the temple economies of the Mediterranean world. Every Roman sacrifice, every Egyptian embalming ceremony, every Jewish temple ritual required frankincense. The Aksumites had it. Obsidian. The volcanic geology of the East African Rift produced high-quality obsidian, volcanic glass used for cutting tools in the Aksumite hinterland, and it was traded northward and eastward. Live animals. The Roman Empire had an apparently unlimited appetite for exotic animals for its arenas and its aristocratic menageries. Lions, leopards, rhinoceroses, giraffes, hippos, all of these passed through Obelisks on their way to Roman markets. The Aksumites were, in effect, supplying the Roman entertainment industry. The ancient text, known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek merchant's guide to the Indian Ocean trade, written in the 1st century CE, describes Obelisks in considerable detail. It was, the author tells us, a substantial harbour with a large market. The roads leading inland were used by caravans transporting ivory and tortoiseshell from the interior. The people of the region were governed by a king whose capital was far inland in a city of great size. That city was Aksum. The relationship between Obelisks and Aksum was the relationship between a kingdom's port and its capital, between the interface with the world and the center of power. Goods arrived at Obelisks from across the known world, were taxed, sorted, and partially consumed locally, with the surplus moving inland to the royal capital. Aksumthe exports moved in the reverse direction, down the escarpment tracks to the harbour, out onto the ships that would carry them around the world. It was a system, organised, administered, protected, a commercial empire with a capital in the highlands and a gateway on the sea, and it worked, for centuries, with extraordinary effectiveness. If you travel to the modern town of Aksum, in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia, not far from the Eritrean border, you will find, in an open field at the edge of the town, a collection of stone monuments unlike anything else on the African continent. They are called obelisks, in the loose terminology that archaeology uses for tall stone monuments of various kinds. But they are not obelisks in the precise Egyptian sense. They are something distinctly Aksumthe, Stelae, carved from single pieces of granite quarried from the hills nearby, their surfaces decorated with a distinctive architectural motif. The carved representation of a multi-story building, complete with windows, beams, and door surrounds, running up the face of the stone in a pattern that mimics the appearance of the Aksumite elite architecture of the period. The tallest of the standing stelae, Stelae II, which still stands in its original position, rises over 24 meters above the ground. It is a single piece of stone, quarried, transported, carved, and erected by human beings without modern machinery, working with the tools and techniques of the ancient world. The largest stela ever erected at Aksum, Stelae I, now lying broken on the ground where it fell, perhaps during the erection process, perhaps later, was originally over 33 meters tall and weighed an estimated 500 tons. 500 tons. A single piece of stone. The engineering required to quarry such an object, to cut it from the living rock without shattering it, to transport it several kilometers across terrain that included hills and valleys, to raise it to vertical and seat it in a prepared foundation, this engineering challenge would be formidable even with modern equipment. The Aksumites did it with ramps, with rollers, with organized human labor, and with the accumulated expertise of a building tradition that had been developing for centuries. Why? Why invest such extraordinary resources in labor, in organization, in the sustained effort required to move 500 tons of granite across the landscape, in a monument that serves no practical function? Because the function was not practical. It was declarative. The stelae were statements of power, erected over the underground tomb chambers of Aksumite royalty. They announced to the world, to visitors, to foreign ambassadors, to traders arriving from distant lands, to rival kings who might be considering the wisdom of challenging Aksumite authority, that this was a kingdom of extraordinary resources and extraordinary organizational capacity. A kingdom that could commission and execute a 500-ton granite monument could do anything. The stelae also reflected something about the Aksumite worldview that archaeology is still working to fully understand. The carved architectural facades on their faces, the representation of multi-story buildings, with their neatly carved windows and doorways, may have been intended to represent the houses of the dead kings buried beneath, a palace in stone, permanent and indestructible, for a ruler whose earthly palace was already gone. The dead king lived in the Stelae, and the Stelae lived forever. The most famous of the Aksumthe Stelae today is not in Aksum. Stelae 2, a 24-meter granite obelisk, was looted by Italian forces during Mussolini's occupation of Ethiopia in 1937. It was transported to Rome in 3 pieces and erected in the Piazza di Porta Capena, where it stood for decades as a trophy of colonial conquest. It became a source of persistent diplomatic tension between Ethiopia and Italy. In 2005, after more than 60 years of Ethiopian requests and Italian negotiations, the Stelae was dismantled, transported back to Ethiopia in sections aboard specially chartered cargo aircraft, and re-erected in Aksum, a stolen stone returned across the centuries. When the Stelae was rededicated in its original location in the presence of Ethiopian officials and representatives from across the world, the ceremony was attended by more than 100,000 people. The stone meant something. It still does. In the middle of the 4th century CE, a young king came to the throne of Aksum. His name was Ezana. He was, by any measure, one of the most consequential rulers in African history, and one of the most consequential rulers in the history of Christianity. And yet his name appears in almost no standard history of the ancient world. Ezana's reign lasted roughly from 320 to 360 AH. It coincided, not accidentally, with one of the most transformative periods in world history, the period when the Roman Emperor Constantine was reshaping the Roman Empire around the Christian faith, when the Council of Nicaea was establishing the core doctrines of Christian theology, when Christianity was moving from a persecuted minority religion to the official faith of the most powerful empire in the Western world. Aksum was not Rome, but it was watching. The Aksumites had been in close contact with the Christian communities of Egypt and the Levant for at least a generation before Ezana's reign. The Red Sea trade brought not only goods but people, merchants, travelers, missionaries, refugees, all carrying their beliefs and their books and their arguments across the water. The story of how Christianity came to Aksum is preserved in a tradition recorded by the Christian historian Rufinus in the late 4th century, a tradition that, even if it carries legendary elements, preserves something essential about how the religion arrived. According to Rufinus, a Christian philosopher named Meropius was traveling in the Red Sea region with 2 young relatives, boys he was tutoring, named Frumentius and Aedesius. When their ship stopped to take on supplies, the local population attacked it and killed everyone aboard, except the 2 boys, who were found reading under a tree. The boys were taken to the Aksumite royal court. They rose through intelligence and good character to positions of trust and influence. Aedesius became the king's cupbearer. Frumentius became the royal secretary and treasurer. When the old king died, his widow asked Frumentius and Aedesius to remain at court and help govern the kingdom during the minority of her young son. They agreed. Frumentius used his position to encourage the Christian merchants trading at Obelisks to provide them places of worship, and gradually over years, through the slow accumulation of personal relationships and persuasion, to extend Christian influence in the Aksumthe court. When the young king came of age and the two Romans were free to leave, Aedesius returned to his home in Tyre. Frumentius went to Alexandria, the center of Christian authority in Africa, and presented himself before the bishop, later known as Athanasius the Great, with a request. He described the situation in Aksum, the king's openness, the growing community of believers, the need for proper ecclesiastical authority. He asked Athanasius to send a bishop to Aksum. Athanasius looked at Frumentius and made a decision. He consecrated Frumentius himself as the first bishop of Aksum. Frumentius returned to the kingdom he had helped govern, now carrying the authority of the Alexandrian Church. And the young king he had helped raise, who had been watching all of this, who had grown up alongside this quietly devoted man, made his decision.
Ezana converted, and with him Aksum. The evidence for this is not only literary, it is written in metal. Ezana's coins are one of the most remarkable historical documents the ancient world has left us. Numismatists, scholars who study coins, can trace, in the sequence of Ezana's coinage, the precise moment of religious transformation. His early coins carry the crescent and disc, symbols of the pre-Christian Aksumite religious tradition associated with the moon god and the sun, with the old deities of the Arabian and African religious world that Aksum had inhabited. And then, at a specific point in his reign, the symbols change. The crescent and disc disappear. In their place, the cross. On gold, silver, and bronze coins circulated throughout the kingdom's trade network, seen by merchants and officials and common people across northeastern Africa and the Red Sea world, the Christian cross announced the new faith of the Aksumite state. This was not a private spiritual decision, it was a proclamation in the hardest and most durable medium available to everyone who handled Aksumite money. This kingdom has changed. This kingdom belongs to the cross. The date of Ezana's conversion is usually given as around 330 CE, before or approximately simultaneous with the consolidation of Christianity's official status in the Roman Empire under Constantine. Aksum and Rome were moving in the same direction, apparently independently, at approximately the same moment. Two of the great kingdoms of the world, on opposite sides of the Red Sea, turning toward the same faith within a generation of each other. This was not coincidence. It was the momentum of an idea whose time had come, propagating through the networks of commerce and culture and personal connection that linked the ancient world together. And it would shape the next 17 centuries of Ethiopian history. When Ezana adopted Christianity, he did not simply add a new religious practice to the existing Aksumite state. He transformed the kingdom's relationship with knowledge, because Christianity, in its ancient form, was above all a religion of texts. The Bible, a library of books accumulated over more than a millennium of Israelite, Jewish, and early Christian experience, that was the foundation of the faith. To be properly Christian in the understanding of the 4th century meant to have access to those texts, to understand them, to use them in worship and in theological argument. The Bible was in Greek and in Coptic and in Latin, not in Ge'ez. The Aksumite Church, the community of believers that Frumentius had nurtured and that Ezana had officially embraced, undertook one of the great intellectual projects of the ancient world, the translation of the Bible into Ge'ez. This was not a simple task. Translation between ancient languages is never simple, and the translation of a sacred text,
where every word carries theological weight, where ambiguities in the original have generated centuries of debate, where the choice between this synonym and that one can determine the boundary between orthodoxy and heresy, is an act of extraordinary intellectual care and courage. The Aksumite translators worked from the Greek Septuagint, the standard Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures used by early Christian communities, and from the Greek New Testament. They rendered these texts into Ge'ez with a fidelity and a literary quality that scholars who study the Ge'ez Bible still find remarkable. The translation preserved the original text while creating a new literary form in Ge'ez, a language that had previously been used primarily for royal inscriptions and administrative records now revealed its capacity for extended narrative, for poetry, for the complex theological prose of the epistles. The Ge'ez Bible is still in use today, not as a museum piece, not as an archaeological curiosity, but as the living scripture of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the oldest Christian denominations in the world, with approximately 40 to 50 million adherents. The 4th century Aksumthe translators created something that has not stopped being used for 1700 years. That is a measure of achievement that almost nothing in the ancient world can match. The Ethiopian Church also preserved texts that were lost everywhere else. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text, considered sacred by the early church but eventually excluded from the biblical canon in most Christian traditions, survived complete only in the Ge'ez translation. When European scholars in the 18th century were trying to reconstruct the Book of Enoch from fragments preserved in Greek and Aramaic, it was the Ge'ez version, brought from Ethiopia, that provided the complete text. The Aksumite kingdom, in its intellectual and religious ambition, had saved something that the rest of the world had let go. The Aksumite kingdom was not only a trading empire and a religious state, it was a military power, and at moments of its history, a military power of extraordinary reach. The Red Sea coast of Arabia, the region known in antiquity as Arabia Felix, the Happy Arabia of the ancient sources, named for its incense-producing trees and its productive agriculture, was, across the centuries of Aksumite power, a zone of intense political interest to the kingdom on the African side. The reasons were multiple, commercial. The Arabian incense trade was valuable, and controlling both sides of the Red Sea meant controlling both the supply and the distribution of that commodity. Religious. As Aksum became a Christian kingdom, the fate of Christian communities in Arabia, which existed alongside Jewish and pagan populations in the region, became a matter of concern and sometimes of protective intervention. Strategic. The Arabian coast opposite Adulis was close enough that any hostile power that controlled it could threaten the sea lanes that Aksumite commerce depended on. The Aksumites crossed the Red Sea multiple times. The most dramatic of these interventions came in the 6th century CE, when an Aksumite force crossed to Yemen in response to a persecution of Christians by a Jewish king known as Du-Nuwas, who had converted the Himyarite kingdom of Yemen to Judaism and was reportedly massacring Christian communities. The Aksumite king Caleb, also known as Ella Atzbeha, assembled an army, loaded it onto ships, crossed the Red Sea, and conquered Yemen. The scale of this operation was remarkable. Ancient sources, on both Arabic and Byzantine, record Aksumite fleets of extraordinary size. Some accounts speak of hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of soldiers across the Red Sea. While ancient numbers should always be treated with skepticism, the fact of the conquest is confirmed by multiple independent sources. For several decades in the 6th century, the Aksumthe kingdom governed Yemen through a viceroy. Aksumthe governors administered cities on the Arabian Peninsula. Aksumthe coins circulated in Arabian markets. Aksumthe troops patrolled the trade routes of a region on the far side of the sea, an African empire administering Arabia. This episode has an unexpected coda. The Aksumthe period of control over Yemen ended when a Persian army arrived in the region, expelled the Aksumthe forces, and established Persian sovereignty over the Arabian Peninsula. This left the Arabian world in a condition of unusual religious pluralism. Jewish communities in Yemen, Christian communities along the trading routes, pagan traditions across most of the interior, and under an unusual political arrangement with Persian nominal sovereignty but real local autonomy in much of the region. It was into this specific historical moment, not long after the Aksumthe withdrawal from Arabia, in a city at the center of the incense and spice trade, that a merchant named Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born. The connection is indirect, but it is real. The world that the Prophet of Islam was born into had been shaped, in part, by the Aksumthe intervention in Arabia decades earlier. And the connection runs deeper still. When Muhammad's early followers were persecuted in Mecca and faced potential annihilation, he directed a group of them to seek refuge across the Red Sea, in the Christian kingdom that had shown historically a capacity for tolerance and for judging people by the content of their character rather than their tribal affiliation. The refugees went to Aksum, the Hijra to Abyssinia, the migration of early Muslim refugees to the Aksumthe kingdom, is one of the foundational events in Islamic history. The Aksumthe king who received them, according to Islamic tradition, was just and generous. He listened to their recitation of Quranic verses about Jesus and Mary, and he reportedly wept, recognizing something true and sincere in what he heard. He refused to surrender the refugees to the Meccan authorities, who demanded their return. He protected them, a Christian African king protecting the first Muslim refugees at the moment when the Islamic faith was most vulnerable. This moment of Aksumthe generosity is remembered in Islamic tradition. The Prophet Muhammad reportedly instructed his followers never to wage war against Abyssinia, a prohibition rooted in the kindness shown to his companions at the moment of their greatest need. The Aksumthe kingdom stands in this way at the very beginning of Islamic history, not as an adversary, as a sanctuary. The city from which the kingdom took its name was, in its heyday, one of the most remarkable urban centers in the ancient world. Aksum sat in a highland valley at approximately 2,100 meters above sea level, high enough that the air was cool and clear even in the hottest months, high enough that the surrounding plateau could support the intensive agriculture that fed a substantial urban population. Water from the seasonal rains was captured in cisterns and reservoirs scattered across the city and its immediate surroundings. The royal palace complex, of which the foundations and some standing walls have been excavated, was a structure of impressive scale. Ancient sources describe multi-story buildings of dressed stone with elaborate interior decoration and features that reflected both indigenous Aksumite traditions and the influences of the Hellenistic and Roman world that the kingdom traded with so intensively. The elite residential architecture of Aksum followed a distinctive pattern. Buildings raised on high stone plinths, with alternating courses of stone and timber, creating a characteristic stepped profile on the exterior walls, and with multiple stories connected by interior staircases. This style, immediately recognizable to anyone who has studied Aksumite architecture, appears carved in miniature on the faces of the great stelae, the elite houses of the living commemorated on the monuments of the dead. The city's markets were centers of extraordinary commercial activity. The goods of the world passed through them. Roman glassware alongside African ivory, Indian cotton alongside Red Sea pearls, Ethiopian honey alongside imported wine. Merchants from across the known world maintained quarters in Aksum and in Obelisks. Greek was spoken alongside Ge'ez, Aramaic alongside South Arabian languages. Aksum was cosmopolitan in the genuine sense of the word, a city where the world met, where people from radically different cultures conducted business and negotiated and sometimes made their homes. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, whose foundation, according to Ethiopian tradition, was laid in the reign of Ezana himself, was the spiritual center of this world. Built on a scale appropriate to the capital of a major kingdom, it was reportedly a magnificent structure, large enough to require many columns to support its roof, decorated with the craft of a tradition just beginning to develop its Christian visual vocabulary. The original church no longer stands. It was destroyed in the 16th century during a period of conflict and rebuilt in different form. But the site has been continuously sacred for 1700 years, and in the treasury adjacent to the modern church, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition maintains that the most sacred object in Christendom is kept under guard, the Ark of the Covenant. Whether the Ark is truly there, whether the object in the treasury is the original Ark described in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy, the container of the stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, is something that no outside scholar has been permitted to verify. The guardian of the Ark, a single monk appointed for life, is the only person allowed to see it. The tradition is ancient and deeply held. The Kebra Nagas, to the Glory of Kings, one of the foundational texts of Ethiopian Christian civilization, compiled in the 14th century from much older sources, tells the story of how the Ark came to Ethiopia. It was brought, the text says, by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, who travelled to Jerusalem to meet his father, and who returned to Ethiopia carrying the Ark, accompanied by the firstborn sons of the Israelite priestly families. The Queen of Sheba, Makeda in the Ethiopian tradition, was, according to this account, a queen of Aksum. Whether this is history or mythology, the question is almost beside the point. The story has shaped Ethiopian identity for a millennium and a half. The claim to descent from Solomon, to possession of the Ark, to a unique covenantal relationship with the God of Israel. This is not a peripheral element of Ethiopian Christianity. It is its foundation, and it roots that Christianity, an entire civilizational tradition, in the Aksumthe kingdom, in Ezana's conversion, in the translators who put the Bible into Ge'ez, in the builders who raised the Church of Mary of Zion on the highland plateau. The foundation was Aksumthe. Everything built on it afterward carries that stone. In the ancient world, the right to mint gold coins was not merely an economic decision, it was a statement. Gold coinage, the aureus of Rome, the solidus of Byzantium, the daric of Persia, was the medium of the most powerful states. To mint in gold was to announce that your kingdom was wealthy enough, stable enough, and administratively sophisticated enough to guarantee the value of what your mint produced. It was an act of political confidence backed by economic reality. The Aksumthe kingdom minted gold coins. The Aksumthe coinage is one of the most remarkable numismatic series in the ancient world. Produced from approximately the 3rd century CE through to the 7th, it is the only indigenous coinage ever produced by a sub-Saharan African state in the ancient period, and it was produced at a level of quality and consistency that earned it acceptance in international trade alongside Roman and Byzantine gold. The coins are small and beautifully made. On one face, the king, shown in portrait, wearing the elaborate headdress of Aksumite royalty, often depicted holding items of regalia. On the other face, additional royal imagery. The inscriptions are in Greek, the lingua franca of Mediterranean commerce, on the earlier coins, and in Ge'ez on the later ones. A shift that marks the growing confidence of the kingdom in projecting its own cultural identity rather than accommodating foreign expectations. The transition from the pre-Christian to the Christian coinage, the replacement of the crescent and disc with the cross, is visible in the numismatic record with extraordinary clarity. Coin by coin, the religious identity of the kingdom changes. These coins circulated far beyond Aksumite territory. They have been found in India, in excavations at trading sites on the western Indian coast that were part of the same Indian Ocean commercial network that connected Adulis to the wider world, an Aksumite gold coin found in India, a piece of African highland culture carried by a merchant across the ocean to a trading post on the Malabar coast. The world was connected. The Aksumites were at its center. The coinage also tells us something about the internal culture of the kingdom that the archaeological and literary record is less clear about. The kings valued self-presentation. They understood that the image of the ruler reproduced on every coin in circulation was a tool of political communication, a way of making the king present in every market, every counting house, every merchant's purse across the kingdom and beyond. The Aksumite kings were, in this sense, sophisticated political communicators. They used the available media, coins, stelae, inscriptions, the architecture of the capital, to project an image of power, legitimacy, and cultural confidence to their subjects and to the world. It worked. For 6 centuries it worked. The Aksumite kingdom did not collapse suddenly. It did not fall to a conquering army in a single, decisive defeat. It did not suffer a catastrophic plague or a city-destroying earthquake that ended its existence in a moment. It faded. Slowly, over the course of 2 or 3 centuries, the kingdom that had ranked alongside Rome and Persia in the assessment of the world's great powers withdrew from the world stage, retreated from the coast, contracted to its highland heartland, and eventually ceased to function as the same kind of entity it had once been. The process was caused by many things arriving not simultaneously, but sequentially, each one weakening the structure that the previous ones had already damaged. The first and most consequential was the transformation of the Red Sea trade in the 7th century CE. The rise of Islam and the extraordinarily rapid expansion of the Islamic Caliphate across Arabia, Egypt, the Levant, and Persia did not immediately destroy the Red Sea trade, but it fundamentally reorganized it. the commercial networks that had connected Aksum to the Mediterranean world, networks running through Egypt and the Levant, through the cities of the eastern Mediterranean, through the ports of the Roman and then Byzantine world, were disrupted by the new political geography of the Caliphate. New powers, new intermediaries, new routes emerged. The Arabian merchants of the Islamic world moved aggressively into the Red Sea trade, establishing their own networks and their own ports. Adulis, which had functioned as the great node of Red Sea commerce for centuries, found itself increasingly marginalized. The transit fees, the commercial taxes, the revenues that had funded the Aksumite state, they declined. The gold that had kept the mints running became scarcer. The coinage deteriorated in quality and eventually ceased. Environmental degradation made things worse. The intensive agriculture of the Aksumite period had, over centuries, exhausted parts of the highland soil. Terracing that had been meticulously maintained began to erode when the administrative systems that sustained that maintenance weakened. Rainfall patterns may have shifted. The productivity of the agricultural hinterland that fed the capital declined. The capital itself, Aksum, became harder to sustain as a great city. Population declined. Monumental construction ceased. The elaborate water management systems that had supported a large urban population fell into disrepair. The political center of gravity of what would become Ethiopia began to shift southward, away from the old Aksumite heartland toward the more productive agricultural regions of the Central Highlands. New dynasties arose that acknowledged the Aksumite heritage without being based in the Aksumite territory. By the 10th century CE, the kingdom that Mani had ranked alongside Rome had ceased to exist as a recognizable political entity. But what it had built, the church, the script, the translated Bible, the royal traditions, the coinage of self-confidence, these did not disappear with the kingdom. They were inherited. The most remarkable thing about the Aksumite legacy is not that it survived, it is how it survived. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, established in the 4th century under Ezana and Frumentius, built on the foundation of the Ge'ez Bible and the Aksumite tradition of Christian worship, is today one of the largest Christian denominations in the world, with between 40 and 50 million members. It has maintained continuity of practice and doctrine for 17 centuries. Its liturgy is still conducted in Ge'ez, the language of the Aksumite scribes who first translated the Bible into African letters. The Ethiopic script, descended directly from the Aksumite writing system, is still the primary script of Ethiopia, used to write Amharic, the official language of the modern state, Tigrinya, the language of the Tigray region in the ancient Aksumite heartland, and several other Ethiopian languages. The Solomonic dynasty, which claimed descent from the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and which ruled Ethiopia with interruptions from the 13th century CE until the deposition of Haile Selassie in 1974, explicitly rooted its legitimacy in the Aksumite tradition. The Kebra Nagast, the text that told the story of Menelik and the Ark, was the ideological foundation of Solomonic rule, a claim that the kings of Ethiopia were the inheritors of Aksumite greatness and the guardians of a unique covenantal relationship with God. The obelisks still stand in Aksum, including Stelae II, returned from Rome in 2005 and re-erected in the field where it had stood for 2,000 years. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion still stands on the site that Ezana consecrated, drawing pilgrims from across Ethiopia and the Ethiopian diaspora. The Ark of the Covenant, or whatever object the guardian monk protects in the treasury adjacent to the church, still waits, still guarded, still inaccessible to outside verification, still the object of the deepest reverence in Ethiopian Christian tradition. And the Book of Enoch, the ancient text that survived complete only in the Ge'ez translation made by Aksumthe scholars, is still read, still studied, still cited in the theological literature of multiple religious traditions. The Aksumthe kingdom has been gone for more than 1,000 years, but almost nothing it created has stopped being used. For most of the world outside Ethiopia, the Aksumthe kingdom was not merely forgotten. It was unknown. The Western academic tradition, shaped by the priorities and blind spots of European scholarship, had constructed a narrative of the ancient world in which Africa south of Egypt was a zone of absence, a place without history, without civilization, without the kind of achievement that deserved serious attention. This was not ignorance, it was a choice. The sources existed. The Periplus of the Eritrean Sea, the Byzantine chronicles, the Arabic historical texts, the ancient inscriptions in Ge'ez. For anyone willing to look and willing to read, most were not looking. The excavations at Aksum, beginning in the 20th century and intensifying in recent decades, have done more than any other development to change this. The work of archaeologists, Ethiopian, British, German, Italian, American, at the Stelae fields, at the palace foundations, at the church sites, at the royal tomb, complexes beneath the Stelae, has produced a picture of Aksumthe civilization of increasing detail and depth. The British Institute in Eastern Africa conducted major excavations at Aksum in the 1990s under David Phillipson, producing the most comprehensive archaeological synthesis of Aksumite civilization available. The results confirmed and extended what the ancient sources had suggested: a kingdom of extraordinary organizational capacity, artistic sophistication, and international reach. The tomb complexes beneath the Stelae have been partially excavated, revealing burial chambers of elaborate construction, underground rooms lined with dressed stone, provided with multiple chambers for the burial goods that would accompany the royal dead into whatever came after life. The coin series has been systematically catalogued and studied, providing a chronological framework for the kingdom's history that supplements and sometimes corrects the literary record. Environmental archaeology, the analysis of pollen, soil, seeds, and other biological material from Aksumthe sites, has begun to reconstruct the agricultural and ecological history of the highland region, what crops were grown, what animals were kept, how the landscape changed over the centuries of Aksumthe occupation and afterward. And the written record of the royal inscriptions that Ezana and his predecessors and successors left on stone stelae across their territory continues to be analysed and reanalyzed as scholars develop better understanding of the Ge'ez language and the historical context of the kingdom. The picture that emerges from all of this work is of a civilization that deserves exactly the status that Mani assigned it, one of the great kingdoms of the ancient world, not a peripheral curiosity, not an African footnote to a Mediterranean story, a world power in its own right, with its own architecture, its own script, its own theology, its own commercial empire, and its own history, a history that shaped the world we live in more directly than most people realize. High on the Ethiopian plateau, where the air is thin and cold and the stars crowd the sky on clear nights, there is a city that has been continuously inhabited for more than 2,000 years. Its name is Aksum. In the mornings, the priests of the Orthodox Church chant in Ge'ez, the language of kings who died 16 centuries ago, preserved in liturgy the way an insect is preserved in amber, perfect, unchanged, still alive in its own strange way. In the fields around the city, farmers work the same volcanic soil that Aksumite farmers worked, using some of the same techniques. The terracing, the water management, the seasonal rhythms that sustained a kingdom when Rome was still the master of the world. In the Stelae field, the great granite monuments cast their shadows across the grass in patterns that have not changed since the day they were erected. The carved architectural facades on their faces, the windows, the doorways, the beam ends, still catch the morning light and throw it back in the same angles they always have. And in the treasury beside the church, the monk who guards what he believes is the most sacred object in the world sits in the silence of his vocation, watching over something that may be legendary and may be real, and is in either case the repository of 17 centuries of devotion. The Aksumites are gone, but what they were, what they believed, what they built, what they wrote, what they chose to preserve, that is still here, in the script that millions of people read every day, in the church that millions of people attend every week, in the Bible that millions of people hold as the Word of God in a translation made by people who lived under the rule of Ezana, who were baptized by the successors of Frumentius, who understood that to make the sacred accessible you must make it speak in the language of the people who need it. The Persian prophet Mani was right. Aksum was one of the great kingdoms, and the measure of its greatness is not the Stelae, though the Stelae are extraordinary. It is not the coins, though the coins are beautiful. It is not even the military campaigns, the Arabian conquests, the Red Sea mastery, though those are real and remarkable. The measure of Aksum's greatness is the simple, astonishing fact that what it built has not stopped being used. After 1700 years, the kingdom that ranked alongside Rome outlasted Rome in the only way that ultimately matters. Rest now. The plateau holds its silence. The stars above Aksum are the same stars that Ezana watched. And in the distance, if you listen, the sound of chanting, ancient, present, continuous. Good night.